Yesterday, Konami released a very controversial update. They decided for the first time in a very long time to change the rules for Time Wizard events that they started holding several years ago. If you're not familiar with Time Wizard, that's okay. I already made a video about it. It's actually sanctioned Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments by Konami that promote playing older formats of the game. Time Wizard is all about sending you back to the past, and that's what the format was all about, getting to play some very exciting old school games of Yu-Gi-Oh with friends at tournaments and win some cool packs for it. Time Wizard side events quickly became one of the most popular ways to enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh at these YCS level events. No longer did you have to stress about playing in the main event. There were tons of different options to be able to enjoy the heyday of Yu-Gi-Oh back in your prime. You could go play your favorite deck at the Time Wizard sides. Or if you wanted to really test your mettle, you could play the Ultimate Time Wizard event, a YCS akin level tournament for those retro formats. Players would travel all over the place to play in these tournaments. They were very exciting. I got to participate not only in the first one, but also in the last 3v3 and multiple 3v3 YCSs with my best friends. Some of the greatest memories I've ever had. Just yesterday, Konami released an update for the Time Wizard events, and this is the first time they did it in a while. Starting at the North American World Championship qualifier this year, next month, current game mechanics and current card text will be used for the Time Wizard event. Ignoring the rest of the information, how there's no Ultimate Time Wizard anymore at this event, that's something I could live without. This single-handedly kills most retro formats or drastically warps them from their original form. On a surface level, it just looks like, okay, well, there's a couple cards that I got errated. What, BrainCon's not playable anymore? Get over it. What I'm going to do today, though, is I have a pile of some of my favorite retro cards that have been affected by this game change, and I'm going to talk about just how much it affects the formats that they're played in. If you're not super into retro Yu-Gi-Oh, you might not know any of these things here, and I totally get it. It just looks like a couple of cards got changed. You know, Goyo Guardian, who? I don't even know who that guy is. Why is everybody complaining about him? So hopefully with the cards that I have in front of me today, I'm going to be able to explain a couple things. This is the best way I figured I could organize my thoughts to share my frustrations about the changes that they've implemented. The first thing I want to talk about is the obvious things, and that is card erratas. Cards that just genuinely do not read the same way that they do back then. About a decade ago, Konami was really experimenting with the idea of making old cards playable in the game again. Rather than releasing a similar card like they usually done, like a Pot of Desires or a Pot of Extravagance, instead of doing that, they just said, why don't we take Pot of Greed and actually just change what it does so it can be fair? Back then, it really wasn't a huge deal, but man, if only we could see what was coming. The first card that comes to mind was errata. Is actually probably one that nobody really cares about. Catapult Turtle as well as Dark Strike Fighter were the first cards errated in the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game. This guy released in Crimson Crisis was a house, man. Dark Strike Fighter, a level 7 generic synchro. You contribute one monster to inflict damage to your opponent equal to its level times 200. This card was a staple in most extra decks when it was released. It really competed for Black Rose Dragon spot. But the main thing about it is this caused for some disgusting FTKs, OTKs. This guy was just really annoying. OTKs and FTKs are nothing new now, but back in the day, there was a time where you could just summon, Summoner Monk, and if it resolves, your opponent just explodes because of Dark Strike Fighter. And that made for some really not fun Yu-Gi-Oh! So they ended up banning Dark Strike Fighter because, a non-once per turn able to tribute himself plus attack for, infinite damage was just a little too good for the game at the time. Back in Legendary Collection 5, he was actually the second card behind Catapult Turtle, which got a once per turn clause, to get a game-changing errata. They gave the Dark Strike Fighter a once per turn on him, and nobody ever played Dark Strike Fighter again. The end. Dark Strike Fighter being errated wasn't even that big of a deal. A lot of players actually were kind of excited about the fact of having another level 7 synchro into their extra deck. Keep in mind when this was happening back in like 2014, 2015, nobody was really playing retro formats outside of GOAT format. Everyone had like a deck, but there wasn't really any tournaments to attend. There was no reason to have the GOAT cards besides the fact they were cool. Speaking of GOAT cards, I want to talk about one card that has been changed by an errata that everybody knows, and that is the good critter Sangan. Level 3 Fiend, when it's sent from the field to the graveyard, add a monster with 1500 or less attack from your deck to your hand. If you're unfamiliar with what Sangan's errata does, he now negates the card's effects that you add from your deck to your hand until the end phase of the turn. Sangan's especially unique because it's not just like playable in a GOAT format sense. Sangan's been around in the game for like decades. You'd be hard-pressed for the first like 15 years of the game to not find a list with Sangan popping up somewhere in it, right? Playable through GOAT format. There's a whole entire critter format based around him. Spent a whole bunch of time limited until it was playable again back in XYZs when you were able to get it off a tour guide from the underworld, make some Zen mains. And then what's remarkable was even later in the game, post-errata, this card was still playable in base decks, right? Like summoning Sangan and linking to Almirage to get Arborea, because it's not an activated effect. That was some sick stuff. Now Sangan's permanently changed throughout every format that he's in, and that's like a really big deal. Maybe for earlier Yu-Gi-Oh, when it was like you're setting the Sangan and letting it get attacked over, it's not a huge deal because you're not going to use the card anyway. But there are some scenarios where like you would crash your Sangan into something to get a search to then use that card for some other mean. Later formats, you would let the Sangan die. You could search Max C or Valor for the main phase 2 if you wanted to counter a player, get some draws then. I don't think that's a particularly good play, but it's an option, right? And for a card that's so simple, why did it need so much of a change? I think based on what we've seen, it's pretty remarkable that it can find a home in modern day decks like Based and stuff like that. And you could see where it would need the errata there, right? Like you just can't be searching some of the best cards in the game, which are all notoriously less than 15, and then using them on the same turn. I totally get that. But why not just make like Sangan 2? They've been doing that for like years, just releasing cards that call back to old iconic cards. Triple Tactics talent is a mishmash of 3 of the best cards in the game. Why couldn't we give like Sangan Squared? Just give him another eye. What's the deal? Although it was one of the later changes, Sangan has been changed throughout all of its formats now, and everywhere it pops up, he will be searching only a card that can be used during the next turn. One card that is a really big deal, though, is the Ring of Destruction. Look at this awesome copy. I have an ultimate rare. I got this from my good friend Ruggles, actually. Ring of Destruction was actually part of the second group of cards to catch some erratas from the OCG. Now, Ring of Destruction had been long banned when this card was errata. It simply says select and destroy one face-up monster and inflict damage to both players equal to its attack. Really simple effect, but a very powerful form of removal. This card has also gotten a rework in its text to be playable. It is at 3 now in the TCG, and nobody plays it because it's really bad. If you're unfamiliar with the errata, it says that you can only target an opponent's monster with Ring of Destruction, and it can only burn for exact game or less. Ring of Destruction was notably really good because you could pop your own monsters to burn for the last amount of damage, and you could burn for any amount at all, right? Like if your opponent had 2,500 and you had a Blackluster Soldier on the field, you could flip this and burn them for the last 3. Even if it was your Blackluster Soldier, you won the duel. Now it's only your opponent's monster, and it's only for exact game. It's not going to come up a lot where you're actually going to be able to do that kind of damage. Doesn't make the card like not good spot removal, but it definitely behaves a lot differently than it used to. And like I said, it gets banned right after, so it was only playable, and it only affects GOAT format that it doesn't work that way. What was the point of errating it? Did we really expect people to play Ring of Destruction and like, when did it get errata? Freaking 2015? What are we talking about? Another card that was changed alongside the Ring of Destruction was actually the Sinister Serpent. Sinister Serpent now reads that if you use the standby phase effect to add it to hand, you have to banish a Sinister Serpent from your graveyard during your opponent's end phase. So what that essentially means is it makes Sinister Serpent a once per every other turn effect, right? You can't use it against your opponent when you add it back until your next turn to make sure you get it back again. This is a card that when it got errated, I'm going to be so honest, I didn't think it had to. This card could have came back without its errata, and I think it'd be perfectly fine. I don't think it would do anything at all, but they changed it just because they could, I suppose. And the result is that we have a card at 3 that nobody plays ever because there's no reason to do it. And if we play GOAT format on Master Duel, Sinister Serpent just does not behave the same way that it did back then. And I think that's really a shame because why doesn't it? Speaking of discarding, another card that got a change much later, actually, I think around 2020 is when this guy got changed. Night Assailant used to read that when it was sent from the hand to the graveyard, you could return a flip effect monster from your graveyard to your hand. Notably, Night Assailant himself is a flip effect, so as long as you had 2 of them, you had an infinite loop between the 2. He's now gotten errated, so he can add any flip effect except himself. And I guess that's good if you don't want infinite loops happening. But I'm going to be so real. It's like Sinister Serpent. Like, who's going to be playing infinite loop discard Night Assailant? I don't think that's a real strategy. This one seems to mean a lot less because typically Night Assailant's played in like Chaos decks where you have like Magician of Faith or Dekoichi or something. You can get those back anyways. But it's just another change that like, man, 2020, like why did it have to happen? I don't think a lot of people can answer why, right? One of the cards that really hurts to see is actually the Lost Millennium Brain Control here. This card also got an errata that just completely mess with the playability of it. Look at that shine, dude. Look at that gold brain. Isn't that hot? If you're unfamiliar with the old text, he would just be able to pay 800 life points and then take a face-up monster on your opponent's side of the field. And you could do whatever with it. You can attack with it, tribute with it, unlike Mind Control. Really cool card. A lot of Edison games would end because of this thing. But now the updated text reads that it can only take control of a monster that can be normal summoned or set. And that's really a shame to think about because we're living in 2025 where a card like Change of Heart is at 3 in Master Duel and nobody plays it. And even to think about it in TCG standards, this card got errated in, 2015? If we were to just wait 5 more years, Change of Heart would be legal, and that card is like strictly better than Brain Control. Brain Control was part of a collection of cards that got errated in Duelist Saga in the TCG, notably home of one of the worst ultra-rare rarities in the game, but also they changed several of these iconic old retro cards to be able to play them in TCG again. for better or for worse. Brain Control was one of them, and this card has really never recovered, right? Like, it's at 3 now, and nobody will ever play it because it's not as good as Change of Heart. Rescue Cat's another iconic card. Multiple retro formats use this as like a staple, a centerpiece of their decks, right? I was talking about Dark Strike Fighter earlier, right? Like, summoning Rescue Cat off of Summoner Monk was crazy. Billy Break, one of the best players of all time in retro formats, had a deck that he built around Rescue Cat. Original effect used to be able to summon 2 beasts from the deck, and then they're destroyed during the end phase, but that's okay, right? Because you'd be able to synchro with them. They're tuners and stuff like that later on in the game. There's even old school GOAT decks that use Rescue Cat, maybe in a different way, but they still use them. The updated Rescue Cat text now reads that the card's effects are negated and they're destroyed during the end phase. One of the coolest things you could do with Rescue Cat is just summon it, and then if you want to get aggressive, summon 2 Air Bellums from the deck, attack twice directly, 2 cards from the hand. That's not too bad. There's so many more cards we have to go through that don't work the way they used to because of these card erratas. And I remember talking about it as a kid. I remember talking about it years ago about how I think all these cards that are getting these changes should just be left alone. Let the card's history, live on.
It actually changes the whole meaning of the card. And now we have all these people assuming, maybe they'll fix banned cards and make them less broken so we can play them again. That is never going to fucking happen.
I don't want to live in a world where somebody reads Chaos Emperor Dragon, one of the best cards in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and goes, why was that card ever banned? This thing looks like garbage. Another card that was very much not garbage, but very much garbage now, is a Future Fusion. Extremely powerful card in this era. This card not only allows you to fusion summon something from your extra deck in 2 turns, look out. The big thing was this card essentially just read that it was a foolish burial for multiple cards when you activated it. Future Fusion's great in like hero decks, being able to send like a water and another hero. It was great in plant decks, actually. We're using it to send Dandelion. Dragon Turbo's a deck where Future Fusion was like the centerpiece of the deck, right? Being able to activate this and reveal 5-headed dragon from your deck and dump 5 of any dragon types from your deck was crazy. Multiple formats where that was like insane right there. That was like so good. Like being able to load up with like Red Eyes Wyverns, get Red MD. Those dragon decks, they just cannot catch a break. Future Fusion now takes a full turn on the field to be able to send the materials to the graveyard, meaning you can answer it with things like Space Typhoon. It has to remain on the field so you can just pop it with something on your following turn. If you had some sort of like combo with like Miracle Fusion or something to use the material immediately, you're gonna have to wait. Dragon Turbo is like non-existent without this card. Like dumping 5 was a really big deal. But also it's not the only change. Like Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon is another card that was heavily errated, where you can only summon it once per turn and you can only hard once per turn use its reborn effect. That's kind of ridiculous, honestly. Like I feel so bad for Dragon players. Like I said, they're really going through right now. These aren't even the biggest hits in like Duelist Saga. And even in a macro scale, this wasn't a big deal that they were errating these cards. Retro formats weren't super explored. People weren't really playing them. And people were like, okay, you're just going to make these cards unplayable? I'm not going to play them anyways. It's not that big of a deal. And dare I say, the game back then was actually pretty good, so there wasn't much interest in reliving those old days. I said these weren't even the biggest changes. Let me go through a few of those really, really big ones. Bionic, the Dragon of the Ice Barrier. Released originally in Duel Terminal, this was one of the best level 6 synchro monsters you could possibly make in the game. Man, I love this foil too. Duel Terminal was sick. You could like scan this card. It has a little QR code in it. You could scan it and play it in the machines back then. Bionic's original effect reads that you can discard any number of cards to the graveyard to return the same number of cards from the field to the hand. Very simple effect, notably not once per turn. And notably also, it could return your cards or your opponent's cards. So you could do some really wacky loops with Bionic, make some really cool plays with it by returning your own cards from the field to their hand. After the errata, this card is like not really that playable. It's a hard once per turn that you can discard as many from your hand and then bounce as many from your opponent's side of the field. You can only do that once, and you can't even bounce your own cards. I mentioned at the beginning that not only updated card text is being used, but also updated game mechanics. And that's going to be a really big deal when I tell you guys about Ignition Effect Priority in a little bit. And then possibly this one hurts the most to see. Everybody, 07 in chat for Goyo Guardian, released in the Duelist Genesis. This level 6 synchro, I said Brio was good. This was the guy. Goyo Guardian is a level 6 Earth Synchro generic 1-tuner, 1 or more non-tuner. When it destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can special summon that monster to your side of the field in face-up defense position. Very, very powerful synchro monster in the early portions of the game. This was released in the debut set alongside cards like Stardust Dragon, alongside cards like Red Dragon Archfiend, the classics. 2800 was friggin' massive. This thing was a tank. 2500 on Stardust Dragon doesn't stack up to a Goyo Guardian. You can't just leave a Stardust Dragon chilling on the board expecting to protect something when he can get run over by the man himself. This card was not only iconic, but integral to the Edison format. What did they change with it? In the Duelist Saga erratas, along with all these other changes, they made Goyo Guardian, so instead of requiring a generic tuner, he requires an Earth Tuner. Huge news for any X-Saber players in the pool. Acquiring an Earth Tuner on Goyo Guardian single-handedly destroyed the card. It wasn't even playable at the time of getting a reprint in Duelist Saga, so there really was no reason to do it. There are no Edison decks, sans X-Saber, that are able to utilize Goyo Guardian now, and that is just a shame. Now he's just not in the format anymore. Him not existing in Edison changes so much. And this is often the card that you will hear people say it should have never been hit in the first place because, like I said, it wasn't playable at the time when Duelist Saga came around and they made it an Earth Tuner. And it hasn't been playable ever since. And it's a shame. This card is literally just memory hold because it can never be played in any of its retro formats if this ruling sticks. And there are a couple other cards in the history of the game that maybe matter on like a larger scale. Like I have Dulor in here, ended up getting an errata much later. This was another card that caused some like degenerate loops by bouncing your own cards. Not as big of a deal as Bionic. It wasn't nearly as like playable. And then Ancient Fairy Dragon, this card actually just got errated in 2023, I think? Rather recently. I just had this here because I had to have somebody explain to me what was changed with it. I forgot. Hard once per turn on popping the field spells and special summoning. That's what the change is. I don't know why they didn't release an Ancient Fairy Dragon. They already have like 4 different variants of it. This one doesn't matter as much though. It's not super played in any of the old retro format. The hard once per turn restriction isn't that big of a deal. But outside of these cards, there's a couple other like obscure ones that have gotten changed that actually matter a lot. Not that I know anybody itching to go play Goki Firewall format or like debut Link format, but Firewall Dragon underwent a really significant change. It also being now a hard once per turn, and that completely like warped those formats. Like half of the decks that played Firewall Dragon just don't exist anymore because of that. These are cards that all their text have literally been changed. They don't read like the cards used to back when they were released. And it's not for like clarification things like problem solving card text. They just changed the effects fully of these cards because they could, and they wanted to bring them back. And I think the majority of them, besides maybe like Dark Strike Fighter, were all poor decisions. They've essentially stripped these cards of their identity, and a lot of the cards like Brain Control, even if they were poised to be able to just come back to the game perfectly fine, they can't do that now. The second part of the video I want to talk about is cards that their rules have just changed. Really, the poster child that I can think of is Mind Crush. Anybody remember the big hoopla about this guy here? Mind Crush back in the day used to be able to flip this up and then call a card in your opponent's hand. Your opponent would have to reveal their full hand to you so you could verify that they did not have the card. And if they didn't have it, you would have to discard a card. You'd resolve the effect. The big thing is Mind Crush gave you knowledge, right? That's the stuff that like here in my garage, buying Lamborghinis, knowledge. They did this about like a decade ago from what I even remember, is they changed the ability of Mind Crush where your opponent doesn't have to reveal their hand even if you call incorrectly. And that's a big deal, right? These retro formats, like getting the knowledge off of things like Dust Shoot and stuff could spell the end of the game. And that's what Mind Crush was also able to do in some sense. And a lot of players didn't take this well, including me. I had a huge problem with them changing the way Mind Crush worked because it didn't seem like that big of a deal. And also it seemed like sort of a mutual respect thing, right? Like you don't want your opponent lying to your face that they don't have a card they clearly do. Mind Crush is just like, I think the first card that really got that change. Ended up not being a huge deal in retrospect, but the rest of these ones are going to be a massive, massive shift. One of the cards that doesn't behave the same like it used to in Edison era is actually one of the poster childs. That's Reicho, Lightsworn Hunter. This is a flip effect monster. You can destroy one card on the field, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. This is one of the most iconic cards in Edison history. It is one of the most powerful turn 1 plays you can possibly do. And what if I told you with these new changes, the card got even better? When you read this card, it says, you can destroy one card on the field, send top 3 from your deck to your graveyard. Current modern day brain would lead you to believe that this effect does not target. And if you're playing at Edison, I want you to completely forget about that. Because in Edison format, this card did target, and that was a really big deal. It was still an amazing card to be able to set turn 1 because of its ability to be able to, since it wasn't sequential, make things miss timing. It was able to trade really well into most normal summon monsters. You could search it off of TCG exclusive Super Nimble Mega Hamster. This had a lot of things going for it. But the main thing about Edison format is that this card did target. That's a really big deal when it's stacking up against cards like Titanial. The plant deck ended up being like a good counter to this because Titanial with a couple Dandelion tokens is like insurmountable. Like you're laughing at the Reicho opponent, right? Reicho in its current updated text does not target, guaranteed, and its effect resolves simultaneously. This card text would infer that the card gets destroyed, and then the top 3 cards of your deck goes to the graveyard. That's a big deal for making cards miss the timing. There's a lot of mechanics in Yu-Gi-Oh! That If you played in the last 10 years, you just don't have to know. That and ignition priority is another one I'll get to. A lot of these old formats, that was a massive deal. Like I think popping dupe frogs with Reicho was a really huge deal to make them miss timing. Popping, Dimensional Alchemist. You want to go further in the game a little bit to like Redo era? Popping Light Pulsar Dragon was another use for Reicho to be able to play in those Chaos Dragon decks. And now it just doesn't do that anymore. It doesn't make it miss timing. Just know that this card behaves differently than it did back in Edison, and a lot of players think it is even better. Almost a god card at this point. Another card that has drastically changed with how we understand rulings is Elemental Hero Absolute Zero. Absolute Zero reads, when it is removed from the field, destroy all monsters your opponent controls. Another card that has this text is like Reborn Tengu, notably removed from the field. And that means just leaving the field by any means. It could be banished, it could be sent to graveyard, it could be returned to the hand. For extra deck cards, it could be returned to the extra deck and it would still trigger. That's a big deal for Absolute Zero. Cards like Bionic would be able to return the Absolute Zero from field back to the extra deck, but back then, Absolute Zero could still trigger, destroying the whole board. This guy was, I'm going to use the word, impossible to remove from the field without triggering his effect. It was that strong. With the updated way we understand rules, if it returns to the extra deck, like Mirror Jade or something like that, it will not trigger its effect to explode everything on the field. Bionic now just becomes like a really comfortable way to take care of the card that wasn't before. Compulsory Evacuation Device is a card that a lot of people have been talking about now. Since not only priority doesn't exist, but also that exact interaction with Absolute Zero, returning extra deck cards back to the extra deck is so good with it. You could catch the odd Goyo and Stardust Dragon with this every now and again, but the fact that Absolute Zero existed made this card like not even that good of a choice. This card's like a joke now. This card's like so easy out. Bionic's the easiest way to take care of it. I feel so bad for Hero Frog players because like this was one of the main things that made the deck real was the existence of Absolute Zero. And now the card behaves no longer the way it used to. Hero decks are another deck that I'm like, what do you do? What are you going to make? You can't make the Shining. He didn't exist. You're going to make Gaia? Oh no, look out. And another card that has changed based on how we understand rules is DD Crow. A lot of players are saying DD Crow has become better because you can think of a scenario like if your opponent activates Phoenix Wing Wind Blast and discards Dandelion for cost to put one of your monsters back on the top of the deck. In Edison format, if you were to DD Crow that Dandelion, it would still trigger and it would give you the 2 tokens. The Dandelion doesn't forget that it went to the graveyard, it would still give you the 2 tokens. It's a mandatory effect. Now if it gets pitched for cost and then you intercept it with the Crow, your opponent will not get those Dandelion tokens. Just so happens, unfortunately for plant players, DD Crow stocks are way up. Check me out. Hopefully describing these in-game changes to you shows that they're on the same level, if not more important than just changing the actual text of the cards for the erratas. Having cards work completely different because the card text is literally different is expected, but having it work different just because it's a time thing is a little bit disingenuous to the period. Like, I don't think it's crazy to say you're not going to see Absolute Zero in the new Edison format that they're forcing you to play. He doesn't clear as much as he used to. I'm playing Compulse all day, baby. Along the same lines of cards that have changed with the rules, I'm going to take a moment to explain to you guys Ignition Effect Priority, because it is honestly such a big deal from back in the day. If you have no desire to play retro formats, if you haven't played the game since 2012, you don't need to know what Ignition Effect Priority is, kitten. Don't worry about it. But now that we have to play by modern game mechanics since 2012, Ignition Effect Priority has been abolished, but it is a huge part, an instrumental way in how the game interacts. It might sound like a lot of words. Let's explain what that is. What is Ignition Effect Priority? During the summoning window, as long as your summon doesn't start a chain, like a normal summon or a special summon of Judgment Dragon, you are able to activate their ignition effects in the summoning window before your opponent is able to respond. I just started playing the game when they got rid of this mechanic, so I never really had to learn it, but when I had it described to me because it was such big change back in the day, this is the example that my friend Leo gave me. So if you don't know how it works, don't worry about it. This is how it was explained to little Nim like a decade ago. Ignition effects are the effects you can activate as spell speed 1. For example, on Judgment Dragon, he has an ignition effect where you can pay 1,000 of your life points to destroy all other cards on the field, an extremely powerful effect. And it was even more powerful back in the day in Edison because what you could do is you could use your ignition effect priority as the turn player to activate his effect in the summoning window. What exactly does that mean? You could beat certain cards that, like today, you wouldn't be able to normally. With these changes, Bottomless Trap Hole becomes ridiculous. It was already a good card. It was a 2 in Edison, but now it's even better. Because back in the day, if my opponent had this Bottomless Trap Hole set, and I had 4 Light Sworns in my graveyard, I could special summon the Mighty Judgment Dragon, and then in the summoning window, I could still activate his ability to pay 1,000 of my life points, destroying all other cards in the field. Even if my opponent chains his bottomless trap hole to gobble him up, the Judgment Dragon still consumes. If this change goes through, your opponent can flip the bottomless trap hole and laugh in your face as you get no value from your big bad boss monster. That was the example shown to me as a kid. The example they give on the Edison format website is using Dark Grepher's ability to summon himself without starting a chain by pitching a Destiny hero Malicious, and then retaining your turn player priority to then banish Malicious to summon the other one from the deck. Since you do that, you're able to dodge a card effectively like DD Crow. Because since the Malicious banishes itself for cost, it's not in the graveyard long enough for your opponent to chain and get rid of it. That's a little interesting scenario to give. One that I can think of is a card like Dark Armed Dragon, iconic for the game. If Dark Armed Dragon was summoned to the field, you could retain your ignition priority to at least banish one Dark from your graveyard to destroy one card on the field. So even if your opponent had that bottomless trap hole or the torrential tribute, you can at least take one to the graveyard with Dark Armed Dragon. Similar thing kind of comes up with, I think, Chaos Sorcerer using his effect to be able to banish a face-up monster on the field. Just making sure you could at least ensure that 1-for-1 off of these cards was like really important. I think Chaos Sorcerer is another one that is similar with like removing cards from the field, but one that is like really big in difference is Lone Fire Blossom. Lone Fire Blossom says once per turn, you contribute one face-up plant monster to special summon a plant from your deck. So what you would be able to do is if you normal summon the Lone Fire Blossom or summon it anyway without starting a chain, you could retain your ignition priority to tribute it from the field and summon another copy of Lone Fire. You could retain your priority to summon another Lone Fire with that one as well. So you can never really get caught dead with the Lone Fire Blossom like on the field, right? Substitute behaves literally the exact same way as Lone Fire Blossom in this sense. A really big deal is being able to immediately remove the Substitute from the field to be able to dodge really annoying cards. One of those cards that people have been talking about is Book of Moon. Not only did this card see play way back in GOAT format to be able to, flip your own monsters back face down, do some wacky things with flip effects like Magician of Faith, but this card was really good in like other eras of Yu-Gi-Oh! Being able to stop synchro summons by flipping tuners, lock out certain monster zones in the Link era. Just a lot of utility throughout the years, right? But now from removing ignition priority, this card becomes really powerful in Edison. Take that same scenario with Lone Fire Blossom. If I normal the Lone Fire Blossom, because I don't have ignition priority, my opponent can activate Book of Moon, flip this bad boy face down, and then I'm ending my turn. I'm losing the game. And this card's at 3. You can get wacky with it. Book of Moon's gonna be crazy. I talked about Compulsory Evacuation Device with Absolute Zero. That's another card that a lot of people have been talking about how good it will be with the removal of ignition effect priority. Like those examples of ignition priority are all great that I gave, but this is a really big one because this was one of the most powerful extra deck cards that you could go into. Next to Goyo Guardian, it was the best level 6. And an important thing about Brio was being able to summon it, into a full board, with the potential of there being like a bottomless or a torrential or something like that, be able to use its effect with ignition priority, bounce everything that might be an issue, and then maybe go for a game shot. Like that was very important with Bionic. And not only did they errata this card to make it worse, but they also got rid of ignition priority, one of the best things to pair with Bionic, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. Thinking back to GOAT format, there's like Thousand Eyes Restrict is another very important thing to use ignition effect priority with. Exiled Force is another card that's a very easy example, offering it from your field as a tribute to pop a monster on the field. Now it gets eaten up by, like I said, Book of Moon is a really powerful card back in GOAT. You're able to flip this down, and instead of losing your monster, you can just poke over it. The last example I can give is actually one that was the kind of the end card of ignition effect priority. Rescue Rabbit was actually a really interesting card because it was able to survive through both rule changes. And that was really crazy because a card like Effect Veiler had finally hit the game. And a really popular interaction is you could summon the Rescue Rabbit and then banish him for his effect with ignition priority to dodge a card like Effect Veiler. While it doesn't tribute, it has kind of the same utility as like Lone Fire or Substitute, right? Being able to get out of the way of really irritating cards that would just normally stop it. And still, while the card was in its prime, it was played afterwards in redo format for like Dino Rabbit decks. So you could still summon the rabbit, but without priority. Cards like Effect Veiler stopped it for the turn. Cards like Book of Moon could flip it face down. It was a lot easier to take care of the Rescue Rabbit. Your opponent wouldn't just be guaranteed the 2 Sabersauruses or Kabazals. Take a look at this rarity, by the way. Doesn't that look crazy on camera? It's a good thing Return of the Duelist format is still left standing, right, guys? They can't hurt that format. That format already banned all the problem cards. Rescue Rabbit's really like the last card that I can think of in that era because it was able to survive through both changes. Really interesting part of history there. And those are just a few examples of ignition effect priority. Like, I guarantee if you sit down and play one of these retro games, it's not just something that comes up every now and again, like missing the time. But I dare you to try to go a retro game without using your ignition effect priority. community. The game and the ban list was built around that mechanic existing. Raigeki Break and Phoenix Wing Wind Blast are other cards that also become a lot better with that removal as well too. I think you'll see these cards in a lot of these new meta decks if this is what they go through. So what exactly am I trying to explain with this video? My goal is to hopefully help people that don't play retro formats understand that, these aren't players just overreacting. These are really, really huge changes, sweeping changes to a retro format that people really enjoyed, just for fun. And it was really cool to be recognized by Konami and be able to play in sanctioned tournaments at YCSs. If you're not really hip with the new kids and you can't keep up with the link summons and what's it, who's it, you can go back and still always rely on your old cards. I've played tournaments at YCSs and Ultimate Time Wizards where people said, I played back in 2010. I picked up my old deck from back then and I just said, let's play, I'm in town. That's so cool. That's so neat. Now with these changes, I hope what you can see is that we're not taking an authentic look back at those retro formats because there are so many sweeping changes. We're more just playing a custom format, limited card pool. I'm showing Stardust Dragon because this card has become significantly better in the fake Edison format without the existence of Goyo Guardian. And I know it seems silly, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on this one guy from the very first set released for Synchros. It's that perfect counter to one of the most common things that you would see in the game. That's just fundamental at that point. And to take it a step further, imagine Dark Strike Fighter in Dark Strike Fighter format when he couldn't OTK. What would the game look like? You want to find out? Me? And not really, but that's what Konami is asking you to do with all of these changes to the updated current ruling. All these important rock, paper, scissors actions, a carefully curated ban list around a mechanic that, although confusing in today's retrospect, existed back then. They want you to just forget about it and enjoy the fresh look at these old formats with new cards. So now the real question I want to answer is, why have we gotten here? What's the reason to update all of these cards, remove all the history from them, and require people that want to enjoy this old classic format in whatever ways they want to? There's no Ultimate Time Wizard now, so in what way besides side events? Try to train a new judge in those old rulings, it almost seems like futile or useless, because when are you going to use that knowledge besides specifically a side event? The only thing I can take from this is I can hope that they're taking this old format, these classic cards, and maybe developing some sort of premier event around them that they need that extra judge power. They need the judging to be more standardized. I could get that. Am I going to be happy about it? No, because I want to play the Edison format I want to summon Goyo Guardian. I want to be real. That card's awesome. But that could be maybe one of the only ways I see this making sense, to require this at every side event that you choose to play in. I've been a part of the judging nightmares of explaining new players old mechanics. I had to explain to a Frog player how missing the timing worked with Dupe Frog. And it really is, it's harrowing, because it's not something you encounter in today's game. But if you want to take an authentic look back at the game, there were some of these confusing mechanics that just happened every time you sat down at the table. So I can only imagine streamlining the judging process or the rulings to updated card text and keeping it, by the book, is to maybe help train future judges for this type of event, assuming it gets more popular. It's going to be hard to do when you've fractured the community just by implementing this rule alone. Or the only other thing I can think of is they have to release something on Master Duel related to this, tomorrow. That's a whole nother revenue aspect, right? All the really good cards are ultra rare, like Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity. I could sort of understand if they released some sort of ladder mechanic for a retro format, or a, I guess updated retro format to attract new players to the game through old cards, even if it is with updated rulings. I feel like that would still be a really powerful way to introduce people back into the game. Those are reasons that I could understand. But at the moment, with the removal of the Ultimate Time Wizard, the premier way to actually enjoy these retro formats, such a well-received, loved decision by Konami to flip them and to use new game mechanics single-handedly destroys any credibility those events have. I exclusively play the game through Time Wizard now. I haven't played a TCG legal deck in the last, I want to say, 5 years or something like that. I play my modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Through Master Duel, and I have a good time with that. I'm able to stream it. I'm able to entertain a whole bunch of people, and the best thing is I'm able to queue it anytime. I just hit a button and I play, and once I get sick of it, I log off. I don't get out enough to, sit down every week like I did in college and play cards. I'm not incentivized to keep up on the current game. I don't like any of the decks either, but I really fell in love with these retro formats, namely Edison format, as you can tell with, the cards that I've collected through the years. That's been my primary way to enjoy interacting with the game. And it is a shame now that they have decided to completely change the way those old people want to enjoy the format. If these changes become permanent, which I hope if somebody important is watching this, I urge you to reconsider. This is a really big deal. I hope I was able to show that it's not just changing the text on a couple cards. There is huge rippling effects that just make it not the same Edison format that we played a decade ago. Now more than ever, if these changes really do stick at a YCS level, I think we need to support grassroots tournament. Ultra Reality Games, PPG, they've had their own problems running, their own tournaments, but E3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Keegan has done incredible work in making sure that the Edison format is not only preserved, but really well supported. He's hosted some sold out, incredible tournaments all around the country. It's been really exciting to watch people participate in them and watch the live stream coverage. They do a great job of running an event and, encapsulating the format in its old history. And I think if we want to play the game authentically, if you want to capture the game in that perfect snapshot, that's going to be the way to enjoy the game. It almost feels like, I'm going to hate comparing us to this, it almost feels like, Super Smash Bros. Melee when they didn't make it on Genesis for the year, right? Smash Bros. Melee doesn't exist without its grassroots tournaments because Nintendo refuses to acknowledge it. We got past the Nintendo not acknowledging, right? Konami was holding these great Ultimate Time Wizard events, all these great Time Wizard Giant cards, offering the Time Wizard side events. And now they want to, at the finish line, like they have the potential to do something great. At the finish line, they want to fuck it up. I think there's other options. I think it's training judges to be strictly good in only these retro formats. They've proven themselves popular enough to require some sort of special judging at the events. I think it's talking more to players. I don't know who approved this at the offices. Didn't one person say this was probably not a really good idea? This is something very new. It's still developing. Things could still change. I really hope they do. But as someone who has strictly gotten to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Retirement home playing Edison, this has been the format that I enjoy the most, and I'm really hoping that they reconsider completely destroying it with these changes. I hope I was able to show you guys that it's not just changing the text on a few cards. There is so many more changes, removing a lot of history of the game, and you're not really having an authentic view of those old retro formats. And I think the game back then was so good, it doesn't deserve to be changed. It deserves to be celebrated. And we were doing such a good job of doing exactly that up until yesterday. Please do something to fix this. I just want to play Yu-Gi-Oh!
In my eyes, I would either have these cards to completely go ham as a motherfucker on, which would probably never happen, or I just wouldn't have them at all. I don't care how nostalgic it'll be to drop a Chaos Emperor Dragon when it doesn't do nearly half the shit it used to do. If you guys liked the video, be sure to like the video, thumbs up the video, have everyone express you enjoyed the video. I thank you for watching, guys, as always. Nim Nim out.